Ladies and gentlemen, the Power Hour DFS podcast is officially back in business. DFS preseason is here. I'm Scott Barrett, joined as always by John Proctor. And today we've got a very special podcast with a very special guest. We're going to be talking preseason DFS strategy with Seth Yates of Rotogrinders. I'm super pumped to have him on. We've continued our hot streak of getting the best guests in the business. And if you're talking preseason NFL, there is no one better than Seth. Last season, I made a ton of money playing preseason football, but to be honest, I didn't really know what I was doing. The entirety of my research consisted solely of reading Seth's article each week on Rotogrinders, but that's all I ever needed. I made a ton of money thanks to Seth's advice, so now we're going to get him on the podcast and pick his brain on the first slate of preseason games. Seth, Johnny, how are you guys doing?
Good, man. What's up?
I don't know about you guys.
Excited to talk about a bunch of players I've never heard of?
Oh, heck yeah, man. This August preseason cash every single year. I mentioned on Twitter the other day and in my article on Rotogrinders, I pulled my contest history from Draftkings and then FanDuel when they offered it 2 years ago. Last 2 years I've played about $800 and returned about $2,300 for about a $1,500 profit. So, $750 every season goes right into the bankroll to kick off the NFL season right away.
And that's the best part is it's just that extra little cushion for your regular season bankroll. So you can do some stupid stuff the first couple of weeks.
Oh yeah, and there's always extra on week one.
That's an insane return on investment there, Seth. I feel like most DFS novices are very skeptical of preseason DFS. They'll see names like Rashad Ross and Fred Williams on the list of top scorers from the week previous and be like, oh, fuck that. This is super random. I don't stand a chance. I don't know who half of these guys are. But and I know Johnny feels this way. Do you think preseason DFS is even easier to win money at than the regular season?
Well, as long as you put the time in, or as long as you can find the information, which we'll obviously get to, you don't have to know a lot about these players. If a beat writer tells you this guy's going to get the bulk of the snaps today, then it doesn't necessarily matter how talented he is or whether or not you followed him in college or where he came from. Just give me 20, 30 snaps. Let's get it done.
Oh yeah, and it is easier if you actually want if you want to put the work in. So it's a lot of shooting from the hip. A big thing is you just have to pay attention to the news, and you can't set your lineups and forget it, because your guy might not be active when the game happens, so you need to pay attention.
I feel like some people, maybe some fish, are going to make a mistake like as the same price as McCole Pruitt and play Gronk over him, not knowing he's going to see 0 snaps, and others will just load up on homer picks. They'll take Ryan Nassib and Odell Beckham and all the backups behind him and all the Giants running backs and just be like, fuck it, whatever. What are some other mistakes that you see players making in preseason?
Well, obviously this first slate's going to be a good moneymaker because the first game being tomorrow on Sunday, and then the next one is next Thursday. So a lot of players, tomorrow Hall of Fame game, national TV on ESPN, there's going to be a lot of people just load that game up. And then there's a lot of people that just don't understand how to use late swap. They just don't know how to do it. So they're going to pick somebody, and then they're never going to come back and check to make sure the guy's actually playing next Thursday. So there's going to be probably 20% of just dead lineups in the GPPs out there this week. So,
and a big part of that is going to be people are going to play Andrew Luck. I mean, they see that he is starting this Hall of Fame game, and Pagano is talking out of his ass saying, Luck is going to play significant snaps or whatever it is, when in all reality he's going to play maybe one drive, maybe one series, maybe 4 snaps. I don't think he's going to play much at all. The first time anyone gets close to him, he's coming out of that game. So I think you're going to see Andrew Luck lineups.
Yeah, 2 years ago, the Giants played in the Hall of Fame game, and Eli Manning went ahead and started, and he threw like 6 passes. So I think you can expect about the same thing from Luck.
Yeah, and I think 6 would be like lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah, just looking at week 1 of preseason last year, like the top scorer from the Hall of Fame game among quarterbacks is Mike Kafka with 7 points. Among the wide receivers, it was Adam Thielen with 6 points. Among the running backs, it was Dree Archer with 12. I guess that's kind of good. But yeah, kind of like what we talked about last year with GPPs, kind of fading that Thursday game almost all the time. Seth, you're recommending here kind of just like maybe a complete fade of the Hall of Fame game?
Yeah, if I'm doing 10 teams, I might have 1 or 2 where I sprinkle a guy in. But I'd rather just sit this out. Let me see what the field does, and I'll know what I need to do if it doesn't bust, which I still think it is going to bust.
Yeah. So next thing, so here's something that people probably don't know, and Scott kind of touched on it a minute ago, is the idea of whether or not you should be playing cash games or GPPs for preseason, and this is something where I take a completely different approach than I do in the regular season. So I want to ask Seth first, and then I'm probably going to agree with him. So, what are you playing?
I have not. 2 years ago, I played some cash games on FanDuel just because there wasn't enough action because all the GPPs filled. But I don't think I played a single cash game last year, though I did look at them. But like the 50-50s are going to be 10 players, and 5 or 6 of those guys are going to be just as good as you, me, and I'm not playing against guys who read my article and are on the same guys I'm on. There's just no reason to do it. I'll join the $3 GPP that has I didn't even look to see how many thousand are in there, but I'm not playing a 50-50 with 10 people.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I look at it. I look for the biggest field games. Right now you have the $3 tournament on DraftKings. I put 20 entries in it as soon as it opened, and I'll probably put more in it. And then they do have a large field double up that I'll probably drop a few in. It's a $5 double up. But outside of that, you want to play the GPPs, and it's a more volatile than regular season, so you're going to have some really bad lineups, and that's why you should just focus on the GPPs.
I opened it up here right now on my phone. Like the $25 double up is 91 players, and the $100 11 people. There's a 22 player, 25. The $10 23 players. Like I have no interest in that. Plus, I want to get as many lineups as I can down in GPPs, so I can build around a core and mix and match players. Because if you hate to get a guy right, but you've only got him on one team, and he's with all of your worst players otherwise. It's sort of like in baseball. You got the guy that hits 2 home runs, but he's with your 2 pitchers that went negative, and everybody else got a 0.
Oh yeah, for sure. Oh, and so never mind, guys. The $5 double up is it already filled. It was 500 people. So ignore that.
So how many different lineups do you think you are going to make, Seth?
Probably at least 10. I don't know that I'll go nuts because I like to just stick to a pretty tight core. Like last year when I won it was a shorter slate. There was only 4 games, but I won the $27 GPP, the dollar single entry, and I came in like 5th in the $3. But like that was Zach Zinner was on every single team. He was my running back. Like I was just like, I'm 100% on this guy. If I'm wrong, I'm going to go down in flames. But and it worked.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing with preseason too. Is there's going to be a guy who if you're doing your research, you're going to think like he's the chalk, but he's not going to be like David Johnson against the Eagles chalk. He's going to be he's going to be chalky, but he's not going to be on quite as many rosters as you see in the regular season. So, like, just if they're that good of a play, just play them because they're going to outscore other people by such a big margin.
Yeah, Zach Zenner was a fantastic play all last season. He was the top preseason fantasy scoring running back. The top scoring quarterback was Brett Hundley. The top scoring wide receiver was Rashad Ross. The top scoring tight end was Chase Kaufman, and the top scoring fantasy defense was the Chicago Bears last year. I mean, there's probably not going to be a lot of turnover in terms of like how good someone was in preseason last year and how good they were this year. But Seth, you want to talk about what made, I guess, Zach Zenner specifically such a good play and kind of what you're looking for in different players?
Well, in that situation, if I remember correctly, I think it was known that the Lions were down to just 2 running backs, and it was basically Zenner who at that point was leading the NFL through the preseason in rushing yards, and they were going to give him. We knew that they were going to give him a heavy dose because he was fighting for a roster spot, and so they basically said there's just these 2 guys. Zenner's the starter, and he's going to get as many carries as he can, and every other situation was muddy. You know, potentially. I mentioned it in my article on Rotogrinders, like some teams will have, say, 6 or 7 running backs, and if you can whittle a situation down to 2, you know, if there's 7 guys, they all might get 5 carries. If there's 2 guys, you might get 15 out of each of them. And we'll get to this once we actually talk about the actual games. There are situations where you can just play both. The same thing happened with Buffalo last year. LaShawn McCoy was hurt. Carlos Williams was hurt. And another guy, they had somebody else, so they were down to 2 guys. So just why not play them both and get all the rushing yards, and if there is a touchdown, you'll have it.
Yeah, and the thing with Zenner he was like a stud athlete. So those like spark score freak kind of guys, your Jeff Janis's, your Zach Zenners, like they usually show out in the preseason because it's a simplified backyard kind of game, and that's what they excel in. So pay attention to those kinds of guys.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a minute to pimp out Seth's article. It dropped like 2 hours ago on Rotogrinders. Title is The Ultimate Guide to Researching Preseason NFL. Fantastic read, and honestly, like, never go a preseason slate without reading one of Seth's articles. They're great. He does all the dirty work. He combs through all these beat reporter articles, pressers, tweets, things like that. So yeah, let's go back to guys you're targeting. You kind of just talked about how you're looking for depleted depth charts, maybe where you can whittle it down to just a few guys, but also maybe you want to go into like constantly combing Roto-World blurbs, trying to see if coaches are talking about snaps and things. Is that what we're looking for? We're looking for snaps and touches or touchdowns. What do you think, Seth?
Well, with the running backs, just as many carries as you can get. Obviously, carries are going to get you positive yards no matter what. With receivers and tight ends, I'm a little iffy on just always chasing as many snaps as you can get because, late in the game you might have a 5th-string wide receiver playing with the 4th-string quarterback, and he's behind the 4th-string offensive line. There's no time. There's no way that guy makes it through the progression. He's not going to ever get to your receiver the ball. So you're not going to see any targets. You might get 30 plays out of the guy, and he sees one pass thrown his way. So, and actually, there is some merit in playing starting wide receivers or like a 2nd-string wide receiver that's going to get the reps behind the starting offensive line with a good quarterback. Like last year, it was the 2nd week of the preseason. I wouldn't necessarily do it this week. But in the 2nd week of the preseason, Julio Jones, he was only going to play 1 series, and I was like, you can't play Julio Jones. What's he do? He catches 5 passes on the first drive, including a touchdown, and he's got like 15 points. And it's like, you're not going to match that with your 4th-stringer who's out here playing with a terrible quarterback behind a terrible offensive line. So there is some merit if you can verify that the guys are playing and actually taking a talented wide receiver.
Yeah, I remember Brandon Cooks also scored like 22 points in 1 week of the preseason last year.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it just seems risky overall to kind of target those guys. But at the same time, each preseason week is different than the last. Like you see some teams start ramping up usage for their starters or winding it back down. That's probably something we should look at too, right?
Right. My general rule, unless you hear otherwise, is the first game you'll see the starters for maybe one series. And they just knock the rust off, and then they're done. And then you should see the backups play about the rest of the first half, and then deep into the roster after that. In the second game, you'll usually see the starters for something close to a quarter. In the third game, you'll see about a half and possibly the first series of the third quarter. And then in the fourth game, you shouldn't see any starters at all unless the guy's probably going to get cut. So that's generally what you're looking for. And I like to play the guys that are playing the second and third quarter because if you watch these preseason games, they pretty much grind to a halt in the fourth quarter. Coaches are just ready to get out of there. They've put enough on film. They're just handing the ball off 3 times and punt it. You don't want guys on the field that late in the game. So you want the guys who are either starting the game that'll play the whole first half, or the guy that's coming in right after the starters finish the series and he's getting the whole first half.
Yeah, and that's why you want to pay attention to rookies who are projected to be a starter or have a possibility of winning a starting role. Like in week 2, the vet starters are going to come out, but that rookie may stay in the game into the second quarter, and in week 3 they may stay into the game, into the third quarter. Like you look at like Jeremy Hill the year before was this preseason stud because he had a possibility of winning that starting job, and they wanted to see what he had, so he played a good bit of time.
And the same with wide receivers. A lot of times you'll see, like if a guy's competing for the third or fourth wide receiver spot, they like to get those guys with the starter because the starter's going to make the right read, and you can actually evaluate whether the receivers are making the right read and catching the proper balls. Whereas if you let those guys play with the third or fourth string quarterback, for one thing, the quarterback may never get to him in the progression, but quarterback may throw the ball wrong, and it makes the receiver look like it's his fault, and it's actually not. So, like you said, look for those rookies or like a veteran who's got a shot at being the third wide receiver. Those are the kind of situations we like to see.
Yeah, and that was like Devin Funchess was someone who people targeted last year because he had a possibility to earn a role for injury as well. So if they have a possibility for a legitimate role, whether they're a rookie or they're a new guy on the team, then they're going to get extended looks on the field.
How interested are you in actual talent? Johnny just kind of talked about targeting those spark score freak guys. Last year, my big thing was like I just went all in on every white wide receiver. I'm like, this is their chance. They're gritty. And like it paid off. I got Janis, I got Salas, Walters, all those guys ranked like top 10, top 15 in fantasy points. And we talked before the show. We were talking about was it Landry Jones, the quarterback for the Steelers, who just saw like every snap but was atrocious. So how important is talent in preseason DFS?
Well, I briefly mentioned my article. Obviously, everybody is talented to a point, or they wouldn't even be on an NFL roster. But the big thing is getting guys, not so much how talented that guy is, but he also needs to be playing with talent around him. An example that I brought up in my article last year was the guy who saw the most targets last season was actually Britton Golden for the Arizona Cardinals. He saw 28 targets, but he only caught 18 of them for 129 yards and no touchdowns. So it's like he's just not that good. And the guys throwing him the ball was, it wasn't like Carson Palmer was out there throwing the ball. He's catching passes from, I forget who even was on the bottom end of Arizona's quarterback depth chart.
It was bad last year. I forget who it was, but he was not good. Yeah, so you have a degree of talent, but at the same time, you really can't be like super nitpicky about the talent that you're looking for. And in the end, you're really mainly looking for snaps, or if you heard a guy is someone the team is really looking at, then it means he's going to get extra targets when he's on the field or extra carries. Or if you hear a guy is like competing for the goal line carry job, that's something too that you really want to look out for. Like for you have with the Lions, you have Jordan Howard, who they say might be their goal line back. So that's a guy that's going to probably get some goal line carries in the preseason, and those carries are absolutely the most valuable thing that you can find in the preseason.
Mm-hmm.
So you crushed it last year, Seth. You made a bunch of money, and you made a bunch of money the year before. For our listeners, what kind of how many points are we talking about to take down a GPP?
Well, when I won the $27 GPP and came in first in the dollar single entry, it was just all the same team. It was 106 DK points. And I was telling you guys before we started the show, I like to build a lot of lineups. Some of them just flat out busted. Like I had one team that scored 26 points. But ideally, most of what you're going to see, people are going to be clustered in the 70s, especially in cash games, like 70, 75. Like over 100, you've got a legit shot at winning a GPP. But you're cashing in the 60s and 70s. But what I like to see is I'm shooting to get 10 points out of each roster spot, if I can.
Yeah, and ultimately you really, if you're going to win a GPP, like Seth said earlier, you need touchdowns. So, the guys that are looking at those red zone and goal line roles, possibly in the season, are valuable for GPP entries if they're going to get red zone targets and goal line carries.
Right, like for a running back, a touchdown 6 points is the same as 60 rushing yards.
Yeah, and it's like pretty rare for a guy to get 60 rushing yards in a preseason game, whereas you're probably more likely to get a touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I'll look real fast if I can pull up Zach Zinner, but I think Zinner he led the NFL, and I think it was like 100 or it may have been 200, but across 4 games. Let me look here real fast.
Yeah, he didn't have a whole lot.
He's not on this slate.
Yeah. So when I guess what is your number one resource that you are reading and paying attention to while we're doing this?
Well, I'll run through my research routine real fast. So like when I'm writing the article for Rotogrinders, and I try to do a lot of the legwork, that way, if you're just coming home from work and you want to play, you'll be able to jump on there and feel like you have a good grasp on every team. But essentially what I'll do is I download the CSV file from Draftkings that has the entire player pool. And then I'll just click on the data tab and filter it so I have each team. And then I'll just kind of I'll pull up a depth chart, and what I like to use is rlads.com, but there's a ton of sources. You can get it from the team sites, or you can go to Football Guys, or all kinds of places you can find depth charts. So whatever you like is fine. And what I like to do is I like to label each guy as what position he is, like running back 1, running back 2, running back 5, whatever. And then I'll note any injuries. Now, for the first week of the season, we don't have any snap counts. If I get time, I'll go back and look at last year's game logs for the first week of the season and see what teams were doing in week 1 of preseason. When it gets to week 2, you'll be able to Google on Super Bowl Nation. They have a team blog for each team. They'll analyze the snap counts with an emphasis on competition, but it's useful for us because we know which wide receivers, which tight ends, which running backs saw the field the most. Then what I like to do is I'll go to ESPN.com. They have their NFL Nation blogs. They have a beat writer for each team that's been at camp since day 1, and I'll just click on the team and read what's going on, who stuck out to the beat writer in camp, which guys look good, which guy look bad, what's the coach saying on playing times and minutes. And then the last thing I do is Jeff Heasley from Football Guys made a Twitter list of football beat writers. If you don't want to follow, there's 300 beat writers on it. You can just go subscribe to the list. And if you want to find it, just go on Twitter and click on my profile and lists, and it's there. But I'll also tweet it out, and you guys can tweet it out as well. What you can do is just open that in its own tab on Twitter, and then it constantly refreshes. And you don't even need a Twitter account if somebody's listening and they don't have one. I'd still highly recommend you get one. But you'll find all the beat writers tweeting out inactives right before the game, or links to their own articles. Just the key is just read as much as you can and take notes and figure out who's playing, who's not, who's starting, who's looking to get a quarter, a half, any relevant injuries, things like that.
Yeah, and to fill in what Seth was looking for earlier, Zenner had 183 rushing yards last year, but he scored
right across 40, right?
For all four. Yeah, that was, and I think that was the most rushing yards. Yeah, that was the most rushing yards. The second most was 157 with from Raheem Mostert. And that's another thing you're looking for. Mostert really shredded it in the receiving game as a running back. He had 19 targets, 14 catches, 194 yards. So since Draftkings is full PPR, if you see a back who's going to be getting receiving work, or might be getting receiving work, then he's worth a look. If a team is looking for a third down running back or something like that, pay attention.
Yeah, I was just looking over tight ends, which I feel is like a crazy crapshoot. There were only 3 tight ends last year who had over 100 receiving yards in all 4 or 5 weeks of the preseason. Only 2 guys had more than 1 touchdown. Is there any science to picking tight ends, or are you just kind of praying for a touchdown there?
Well, it's tough because a lot of times you're just going to end up with 2 catches for 20 yards or something, which is fine because that's what everyone else is getting too. The one thing I was going to say, though, you mentioned don't play Gronk. Obviously, I won't play Gronk this week, but you can make a case for playing the starting tight end if you think he's going to get a series, and if they happen to score on that series, and if he gets 2 targets, that might be all the other tight end gets anyways. The guy might play the whole game and see 2 passes.
Yeah, and to add to that, highly drafted rookie tight ends who are possibly competing for a starting role, those are guys who are interesting as well. Like you have this year, it's Henry and Hooper are kind of like your guys, and then Nick Vanett or Vanette, I don't know how to pronounce it, who's kind of competing for a backup role, but he's competing with Jimmy Graham, who's really he's behind Jimmy Graham, who's probably not going to play at all in the preseason, and Luke Wilson, who's really old. So those kinds of guys might get some extra run as well.
A good situation I was looking at on this first slate is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Austin Seferian-Jenkins, he's been in the doghouse. Last month he got sent home from practice, I guess, because Cotter has issues with the coach. But now apparently Cameron Brate has passed him on the depth chart. So Brate's the number 1, and it's crazy depending on what article you read. Earlier today in practice, actually, Austin Seferian-Jenkins was running with the fullbacks. They ran 4 different tight ends before he saw any reps. But then when they did the red zone work, he saw all the number 2 reps. So I actually think when Tampa Bay plays the Eagles next week, that we could see a heavy dose of Jenkins out there, just because they're going to make him prove it. Even though he's an established veteran, he might be running with the 2s and even the 3s. He was running with the 3s in practice some this week too.
Yeah, Johnny knows I'm a huge ASJ guy. I really loved him. Killed it on a small sample size. I didn't buy into Brate, who the Buccaneers actually dropped before week 1 last year, and then picked him back up in week 2. But yeah, apparently this seems real, but at the same time, because I have so many shares already. I kind of just want to like hope and pray that they're just doing this to motivate him, and then he's going to come out in preseason up against second-string defenses and just blow them away. He's definitely going to be a guy I have a lot of ownership in this week. But did you want to start with the Hall of Fame game, the first slate? I know we already touched on fading it, but is there anyone on Green Bay or the Colts that you would look at?
Probably not a tight end. So real fast, let's talk about. In my article, I mentioned I looked at the last 2 Hall of Fame games just to kind of give some context here. The teams that play in this Hall of Fame game get 5 preseason games instead of 4. So coaches kind of hate this game. You know, it's an extra preseason game. The players' union already wants to get down to rather do 2 preseason games anyways. Like, you know, they hate having 4, but 5 is really overkill. So you aren't going to see a whole lot in this game. Both teams just want to get out of here injury-free. Like, Packers already announced they're not playing Aaron Rodgers. They're not playing a bunch of their starters. It's odd that the Colts are going to go ahead and play Andrew Luck and some of their starters. But last year's Hall of Fame game, the Vikings beat the Steelers 14-3, and there was just 429 total yards. As you mentioned, Landry Jones was the only quarterback for the Steelers. We were all industry-wide all in on him. He went 15 for 32 for 128 yards and an interception, like 7 points or something. It was just absolutely absurd. But the only guy that really killed it was Vikings backup tight end Michael Pruitt. Had 4 catches for 51 yards and a touchdown. But everybody else was just, you know, if you passed on the whole game, you were happy. 2 years ago, the Giants played the Bills. That game ended 17-13. The Giants ran the ball 38 times and only threw it 22 times. Basically, the Giants just said, let me just run out the clock. The Bills, on the other hand, had a quarterback competition going on, so they passed it 40 times between 3 guys. It was Thad Lewis and Jeff Toole and E.J. Manuel. But, like, really, even in that game, there was a couple guys that caught a touchdown, but there wasn't anything. Like, if you missed the whole game, you weren't sad about it.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing is, we talked about talent earlier, and that's kind of with quarterbacks, you know, just because a guy is going to get 2 or 3 quarters. I mean, if he has no idea what he's doing as a quarterback, then he could be absolutely awful. Whereas, you know, with a running back who's really athletic, who doesn't understand the schemes or the protections or whatever, when you hand him the ball, he's just going to run the ball like a running back.
Mm-hmm.
Are we interested in Brett Hundley at all? He led all quarterbacks in preseason fantasy points last year.
Yeah, so Aaron Rodgers is sitting, and Brett Hundley was going to play in this game, and then he injured his ankle this week. So he sat out the last 2 days in practice, and it's all but guaranteed he's going to sit. So that's going to leave the Packers with just Dan Callahan and Marquise Williams. So if either of you want to talk about them for a second.
Yeah, I mean, so Joe Callahan was, I guess, like a stud B3, threw for a lot of yards, quarterback, but he's been on the team a little bit longer, so I guess that's why he's going to start. Probably not real excited about either of them.
Yeah, they interviewed him this week, asked him about getting a start on national TV. This is the first time he's ever played a national TV game because he played at Wesley College in Delaware for college, so he's never been on TV. I don't know a whole lot about him. You know, it's worth something that he's going to get a half, but I can't see how he's going to be effective.
Yeah, and I think if you're playing the Hall of Fame slate, it's worth maybe tossing one or the other, or maybe both of these guys onto like one lineup, like one entry each, maybe. But if you're only playing a couple lineups and a couple entries, I probably wouldn't play either of these guys.
Yeah, the other guy, Marquise Williams, is a rookie. He was at North Carolina last year. If you played any college DFS, you know who he is. good dual threat quarterback, gets you several rushing yards every game, and not the best passer, but he got it done. I'd probably prefer Williams if I was picking one out of the two, because he should see more reps against the backups. Granted, he's playing with backups, but I'm not that interested in Callahan against the Colts starting defense.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And then I mean, like rushing yards. If you're against a vanilla defense and he rushes for a touchdown, then he is, Williams has met value if he rushes for a touchdown. So
Yeah, like I said, we're shooting for 10 points out of a position. You'd like to have a little more than out of your quarterback, but if he gets you 50 rushing yards, that would be a huge jump start there.
yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I think for most, you're pretty much fading the Packers for the most part. People are going to want to play Jeff Janis. He's like always a preseason stud. He's good at the whole flag football thing, but I don't know. I don't know who's throwing him the ball. Are they going to be able to get it to him down the field? Is he going to play that many snaps? I don't know. They have such a deep wide receiver crew that I'm not sure if I'm going to touch them.
Yeah, if this were next week, I'd be interested in Janis, but like I said, same situation with what I mentioned at tight end. There's some merit in playing the starter. On the first drive, maybe he goes all Julio Jones on us and gets 3 catches and a touchdown, and you're happy. But if he doesn't, you're done.
Yeah, and there's a good chance that Janis and Abradaris will be the starters, and who knows how long they're going to play. If we hear that Jeff Janis is going to play a whole half or something, then there's merit. But if we have no news at all, the Packers have they have 1, 2, 3,
9 guys
4,
is what
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 9 or 10 guys that are healthy at the moment that could be playing tomorrow. So who knows? Especially if there's only 20 or 30 passes to go around.
Right. The other thing that I mentioned that I'll do sometimes in preseason is Geronimo Allison is like the 5th wide receiver on the right side on the depth chart. But he's been practicing with Marquise Williams. Caught a touchdown from him a few times in practice. So there's some familiarity there. Like, I don't necessarily have an issue if you're playing Williams. Maybe you stack him with Geronimo Allison and try to get that combo touchdown, which would be awesome. But just realize that that's also risky, because if you don't get it, then you might end up with two really bad scores. You've got 2 huge holes in your roster.
Yeah, and that definitely goes to whether or not you're looking to cash or you're looking to win a GPP. If you play Marquise Williams and Geronimo Allison and they connect for a touchdown, you have like a huge lead on the field. But if they don't, then you're screwed.
The other thing, though, is like the handcuff quarterback wide receiver thing, I don't think applies as much in preseason. You're doing it in the NFL because you're hoping for the one guy that catches 3 touchdowns. So you got 3 touchdowns from your quarterback and 3 touchdowns from your wide receiver. But like, if a guy's just catching 1 touchdown, it's not a problem to find a quarterback who also threw a touchdown.
Yeah.
You don't need the handcuff.
Right, and I guess I should say if he catches 5 passes and a touchdown, then
yeah. But you can ideally pick one or the other. You don't have to play them together. That's a pretty big risk.
Yeah, there's so much variance in preseason to begin with.
Are you guys interested in, on the other side of the ball, Josh Ferguson on the Colts? Gore's not going to play. He's old, and then there's Todman and Turbin who are kind of unexciting. But the team really loves this guy. He went undrafted, but he had they signed him to the top contract that you can offer an undrafted free agent. So they really liked him. They're really excited that he didn't get drafted, so they can grab him up. Apparently, he's going to get a shot at being Gore's backup. Are you into him at all in this slate?
Yeah, that's the one name that, as I was searching through Colts reports and I'm just on Google reading team previews, everybody that's been at practice is like, just talking about Josh Ferguson, Ferguson all the time. And I'm like, so I did a little bit of research on him. He actually got some reps with the starters on 2 days ago in practice. The thing I've noticed with these preseason games, if you watch them, is that things really grind to a halt at the fourth quarter. Once both quarterbacks have, got a chance for evaluation and they've seen what they need to see out of the receivers, then I think coaches are kind of looking at the backup O lineman and here, go out there and run block and let's burn the clock out. We'll run it 3 times. If we get a first down, we'll keep going. If not, we'll punt it and they'll run it 3 times back at us. So you see in the fourth quarter, you'll hardly see any passes going up. So I think you could see a situation where the entire second half, Ferguson and Trey Williams just split carries, or each of them gets either switch off drives or by quarter or something. So I could definitely see taking a shot on Ferguson, but there are other situations on this slate that are less crowded. For example, the Eagles running back situation I mentioned in my article have 5 guys on their roster at running back right now. So you got Darren Sproles, he's 33 years old. He's not likely to play much. Ryan Matthews reported to camp with an ankle injury, and he just started practicing this week, but he's not going to play. And then the rookie that they drafted, Mendel Smallwood, he has a quad injury, so he's likely out. So it's going to be down to Kenyon Barner and we got it up right here. Let me go back up. Kenyon Barner and Cedric O'Neal, and then there's also Byron Marshall, I guess. So there's like 3 guys there. But if you're talking splitting running back carries 3 ways versus 6 or 7 ways, like I want the guy that's in the 3-way split every time.
Right.
And while we're on that, the Cowboys aren't on this slate, but on the Saturday slate, similar situation there. Darren McFadden's out. Zeke Elliott is injured. They're down to like 2 guys basically. So you're going to want to play Darius.
Dunbar's on the pup.
Huh?
Dunbar's on the pup.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dunbar's on the pup. But what is it? It's Jackson, right? Darius Jackson.
Darius Jackson. Yeah.
He's actually a legit talented running back. So he's going to be your must play on Saturday. But we'll obviously get into that when we do that slate.
Yeah, Darius Jackson probably like the odds-on favorite right now to be this year's Zach Zenner.
What about Jonathan Williams on the Bills?
I haven't dug too deep into that situation. What are you thinking there?
We really like him. I mean, like just watching tape and looking at his college stats, just looks really good. I know Greg Cosell said he had the fastest feet out of any draft-eligible running back, more so than Ezekiel Elliott. I think he's super talented, but at the same time, Carlos Williams is, fat, and I don't think they're going to give LaShawn and suspended, yeah. And LaShawn McCoy, I don't think they're going to give too much playing time to. He did just sign Reggie Bush, but I'm not sure if he sees the field, and it's just kind of Mike Gillislee.
Yeah, Gillislee. Yeah, that's something I would be interested. Yeah, I think that's it. That's coming back to me now. I did briefly look at that, but that's absolutely a good situation to target there.
Yeah, and then with the Thursday slate, the Bears, who aren't completely in love with Jeremy Langford, as you read, camp reports and stuff like that, and they drafted Jordan Howard. And their recent reports with Jordan Howard is they really like him as a third down and goal line back. So those are really valuable carries if he's getting those in week 1 of preseason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think essentially what we're getting at here is, obviously we're advising people to fade this Hall of Fame game. It's not going to kill you no matter what happens, but you'll be able to watch tomorrow stress-free and just watch everyone else's players bust. You're going to see some of your opponent. For one thing, you're going to see people play Aaron Rodgers, who's not even playing. and you'll see some Andrew Luck, who is starting but is not going to play much, a series or something. But you're going to see people use 7 players from this game and have 35 points when it ends. So you're going to be sitting good if you just fade this game, and you'll be able to swap in the guys on Thursday that you want to get. Just don't forget about it. And obviously I'll have an article up, and hopefully we'll be able to do a podcast again before then too, if you're more, for people that are more into the audio style.
Yeah, I think pretty much before every slate, me and Johnny and Seth, if you can make it, we're going to try and do a podcast and really go through the whole slate. This is more just a general what we do and how we approach preseason DFS. But before each slate, we're going to try and talk specifically about each of these players, go over some guys that Seth found and really liked in his article, some guys that me and Johnny liked. A cool thing about working for PFF is I have like easy access to their grades and their snaps and their targets, and they track all that stuff for preseason, so we can always look back at the prior week, see usage. Oh, look, this guy saw more snaps than anyone else. Maybe we should look to playing him this week. I don't know. I guess before we wrapped up, was there? You want to talk a little bit more about the Thursday slate of games, or have you not really dug too much research into that yet?
Well, I've dug into it kind of in a preliminary amount, but there's so much that you need, like essentially all of these beat writers to file their report the day of or the day before, so you can kind of know what the coaches are thinking. For example, Jimmy Garoppolo and the Patriots are going to play the Saints, and we all know about the Saints' pass defense from last season. And so this could go one of two ways. With Tom Brady suspended, he was in the same situation last year. It was not guaranteed that he wasn't going to be suspended. Jimmy Garoppolo played an extensive amount of time, was a pretty high-scoring quarterback, and he was a great play almost every week. So, like, if I'm getting Garoppolo for a half against the Saints, that's probably where I'm looking at quarterback. I'll want to check in on the situation in Denver with Mark Sanchez and Simeon, I think his name is the backup, and a couple other situations. Colt McCoy, I might be interested in for the Redskins. But I guess what I'm saying there is, don't feel like you have to play Marquise Williams or Dan Callahan in this Sunday game. And on the other side, it's Luck's going to start, and then it should be Scott Tolzien and Stephen Morris. But none of those guys get me excited either. Anybody else that you found at quarterback, you think, for Thursday, other than what I mentioned there?
Yeah, I think another interesting one is Ryan Mallett, who was like not as awful as we thought he was last season when he kind of came in to start for the Ravens. And the Ravens have pretty much said that Flacco is not really going to do much, if anything, in the preseason coming off the ACL tear. And there's a good chance that they only carry two quarterbacks through the season. So, Mallett's kind of going to be getting his extended tryout look for them. And they really, the two guys behind him aren't really all that viable. So there's a good chance that he probably plays a whole half this Thursday, maybe possibly more. And he's a guy that people aren't really going to look at as much. Garoppolo is going to be really, really popular. Mallett is not.
Yeah, I think Garoppolo will be the chalk, no doubt about it, because even if you aren't getting a half, he gets to play with the Patriots starting offense. He's going to have Gronk possibly out there for a few plays. He's got Martellus Bennett at tight end. He's got their starting wide receivers. That's actually a good offense and a terrible defense against the Saints.
Yeah, and he's got plenty of experience in the preseason, and he's played in some extended looks in the ends of fourth quarters and regular season and stuff. So he's been effective. So he's not really like a guy who's gonna go out and bust like Landry Jones.
Right. So real fast at running back, I already mentioned the Eagles situation: Kenyon Barner, maybe Byron Marshall, Cedric O'Neal. We mentioned Ferguson. Anybody you guys have found in your preliminary glances through here?
So the Ravens, if the Ravens say Forsett and Kenneth Dixon are going to miss, Dixon got banged up a little bit, and Forset's really old. So if those guys aren't going to play, then there's a good situation with West and Buck Allen to look at in Baltimore. But other than that, we're waiting for a lot of reports.
Yeah, actually, Terrence West, I heard a lot of the same stuff about that, and he could see an extensive amount of work. He's going to be a very solid play.
Scott, anyone?
I just want to say real quick, Rob Gronkowski played 0 snaps in the preseason last year. That's why I brought his name up before. I don't know if he plays at all this year, but I think I remember reading something like the Patriots. He was like the one player that Belichick was like, no, we don't want you out there when the game's irrelevant. That's kind of what we saw in regular season last year. I think it was because like 2 years ago he got injured in a meaningless snap in the preseason, or meaningless snap in the fourth quarter in the early regular season. So I think that's why he doesn't get that kind of usage.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
They have Bennett this year.
Bennett. Yeah. He could be an interesting play, but I think the Washington running game could be a little interesting. They have like no depth, and not really due to injury. They just don't have too many like versatile weapons there. They say Matt Jones is the guy, so I don't know if he sees a lot of snaps, but I could definitely see Keith Marshall being someone to keep your eye on, or maybe even Chris Thompson.
Mm-hmm. And just remember, Keith Marshall is hurt right now, so don't play him week one. Don't play him week one, but he's a guy to definitely look out for the preseason if he gets healthy.
Right, and that's one thing I didn't mention when we were doing the run through. Like some of these rookies that, if like say they missed the first week, you might see them in week 2 or 3 get a heavy load because the coaches need to get a look at them. Like I think you could see that with the Eagles with Wendell Smallwood. He's got a quad injury right now, so he's going to miss the first week. Week 2 they may need to see what they have there, so they might give him 10 or 15 carries. But obviously we'll just keep our ear to the ground for the beat writer to say that.
Yeah, and that's a big thing is like looking up, like Seth mentioned this earlier. We talked about it a little bit, but when you make your lineups, make sure the guys that are in your lineups, make sure you're looking them up, because you could find out an hour before the game that they were sore the day before, so they're just not going to play at all anymore, and that opens up a million other possibilities. Not a million, but one other possibility behind them who may see a lot of snaps, but you don't want to be playing a guy who's not going to play.
Right. Yeah, generally, if you're going to play preseason, obviously you're going to have to be available right before lock, the same as you would in NBA. And what I'll do is I'll just keep that NFL beat writer list open in its own tab in my browser and just keep refreshing it, seeing what the beat writers are saying. But if you don't know, if you haven't heard anything about a guy, you can tweet the beat writer or send him a DM if their DMs are open and just ask, hey, do you know anything about this guy or that guy? Because, a lot of people don't necessarily follow preseason, so these guys aren't going to write an article to tell you that Julio Jones or Calvin Johnson retired, but Julio Jones isn't going to play week 1. That's not an article, but he'll definitely tweet it out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if you're planning on playing Julio Jones week 1 in preseason, then preseason is just not for you.
Right. Well, we didn't really talk about the Colts wide receivers, but I think people are going to fall into that trap. You're going to see some Andrew Luck out there, and then people are going to team him with T.Y. Hilton or Dante Moncrief because, hey, the Colts are playing their starters. That's what Pagano said. But you aren't going to see enough there to make it worth it. The one guy I did mention, well, 2 guys I mentioned, Quan Bray is going to play behind those guys. He could see a little bit of, there's some value there, and then a deep flyer is Chester Rogers. He's been making some waves in camp, but again, there might be 25 to 30 passes to go around between 12 guys. You'd be lucky if you get 5 targets. Like, you'd be happy with 5 targets.
Yeah, and I think a guy who's going to maybe have value later in preseason, who's probably a trap right now, is Philip Dorsett. Since they say their base, the Colts have said their base is going to be a 3 wide receiver set this season. So when the starters come off the field, we're probably going to see Hilton Dorsett and Moncrief if he's out there. I know he's been a little banged up. If those three are their starters, they're all going to come off the field and all be replaced. Whereas maybe week 2, week 3, we might see Dorsett getting actual starter snaps in maybe the wide receiver 1 and 2 spot because he's the guy who's going to take over that role if Hilton or Moncrief would get injured later in the season. So he may have value later, but don't fall into him right now.
Guys, what are we doing with the defense spot? Are we just picking a team at random?
Well, so this is funny. I was looking through the stats you sent me from last preseason. The Eagles were like the 3rd or 4th highest scoring defense because they had scored 2 punt return touchdowns, but they were also the defense you wanted to pick on. So, and obviously the reason you wanted to pick on them, and we'll get into that when the 49ers play, was because with Chip Kelly out there running his offense, he likes to run a lot of plays, so there's value for that team and for their opponent. But generally what I'm doing is I'll want to attack a terrible quarterback to try to get some interceptions, maybe a defensive touchdown. But then also, like, if I hear that 4 or 5 guys on the offensive line are out, then I'll go after the defense going against them. Well, I have heard people say team totals, but that's just an absolute trap. Vegas is just setting these lines for people to gamble on. They're not that accurate.
No, not for preseason. And I think the Colts defense might be something that you could possibly play. But
yeah, I mean,
yeah, you say like pick a defense to pick on a terrible quarterback, but they're like all terrible. Obviously, they play in the NFL, so they're elite athletes, but like compared to the top 32 quarterbacks that we're used to seeing, like it's really like not good. Like Landry Jones last year, I guess. So how are you determining the quarterbacks to pick on? I guess like second stringers, third stringers, teams that definitely aren't playing a first string quarterback, or
yeah, in general, yeah. Like last year, I'm trying to think. Like 1 week, I actually picked the defense against the Patriots because they were missing like 4 starters. That didn't work out because Garoppolo owned me. But sometimes, like you can do the Eagles. Like Kenyon Barner was actually their returner last year, and so you could do like a returner defense stack. There's a lot of value in that. Try to get the double dip.
Lockett returned a few last year, right?
Yeah, Lockett for the Seahawks. Yeah, so Seahawks and Lockett stack was a good choice.
Yeah, just don't target teams that have veteran backups. Like don't target the Redskins, with Colt McCoy, or the Bucks who have Mike Glennon. Like those guys who have played in the NFL before are not the guys you want to target when you're picking a defense.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Niners will be an interesting defense because they're gonna play more snaps, and the teams that are playing them, because those fluky touchdowns and stuff, they happen. So the more snaps that are going on for those preseason games, the more opportunity for one of those stupid plays to happen.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Garrett. Yeah.
One last thing on the defense is like I'm not afraid to play a defense against one guy. Like if I have an offensive player, that's not going to stop me from playing the defense. There's going to be touchdowns scored. You might as well have it if you think a guy's going to score a touchdown, but that doesn't mean I won't play the defense against him either.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Don't be worried about having like a running back going up against your defense. Yeah, in preseason. Mm-hmm. But I feel like once we start talking about fantasy defense, that's a good indicator that it's time to end the show. Seth, this was awesome, man. Thanks for bringing all your pearls of wisdom that you usually bring to your articles. Johnny, you killed it as usual. More than happy to take a back seat here and just listen to you guys come at it with the good stuff.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm looking forward to making some money and putting out some content this year, and hopefully making money for all of our followers too.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll do this again. And make sure, if you're not following Seth on Twitter, if you follow us and not him, it's Seth A. Yates DFS. Scott is Dude Fantasy Bro.
Not anymore.
Oh yeah. Oh, I
Now it's
I can't even let this.
Now it's at Scott Barrett
DFB.
DFB. Yeah.
That's so gross. Anyways, but and of course I'm Super Duper Man 22. I won't fall to corporate power and change my Twitter handle like Scott. So yeah, we're gonna try and do this again. We're gonna try and do as many of these as we can, as available as we will be. There's tons of preseason slates, so we'll try and get as many of these out as we can. Obviously,
we'll try
all
and
three
get
of
Seth
us.
on.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, we'll be doing a lot of tweeting. A little tidbit I just heard. Apparently, Keith Marshall is back in practice. I would still doubt he does much in week 1, but at least he's now healthy. But yeah, make sure you follow all of us. I tweeted out the Seth's article. Read that. I also tweeted out the list that he posted. If you don't want to follow, 300 beat writers, if you want to go through people that I follow, I have about 50 beat writers that I follow that I think are pretty good if you want to follow all of them. Other than that, this was fun. We'll do it again. We'll see everybody later. Thanks.
Yes, thanks.